Thank you for talking to me today, Oyin. I would like to start by asking you to tell me a bit about yourself and your career so far.
Okay. My name is Oyin Egbeyemi, but I prefer to be called Oyin or Oyin Damola. And this is because my name has I think it's a beautiful meaning. It means honey mixed with wealth. So it basically means that whatever is good, I make sweeter. That's why I like, I like it. Yes, I actually really like my name. And Oyin means honey. That's what my dad calls me and a few other people. Anyway, about me, well, I'm a Nigerian and I actually, professionally speaking, just starting from my education, I studied engineering at university and then went on into a career in, engineering to start off with, and then consulting and education, and now I'm working in the impact space for the government. So I've had a very dynamic career.
And today I'd like to focus on that dynamic career, particularly when it comes to like policy and understanding where we are as a country in terms of like our policy focus. So I'd like you to start to wear your education hat and talk to me about your time in education. I do know that you've come into education from a private education perspective, but talk to me about your understanding of the Nigerian education system and how we can solve for the problems we have currently. Because we have a very undereducated population that fits directly into employment, which is something you're
Yeah.
working on now. And in terms of like the 21st century and the country we are supposed to be planning for, I do think we're behind and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So talk to me about how you educators think about this from a policy perspective and what the government can be doing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's very, very, very broad because I have many thoughts about education. And I think it even starts from why I got into education in the first place. Like I mentioned earlier, I studied engineering and I did do like my after school internship, which is our National Youth Service Corps at an engineering company. I worked in oil and gas for that year. And while I was there was an opportunity to volunteer at a public, well, maybe not a public, I don't think it was a public secondary school. I think it was just like a local secondary school that was around the company. And it was that hands-on experience that made me realize that many people need help. And it also made me realize that I am very privileged. I am very lucky. I come from a family that was able to afford a good education for me. Whereas education should be a basic human right. So I think it just didn't really sit well with me. But at the point, I think I didn't know how I was going to get into education, even though my family had been in education for decades. My mom owns a school that is 17 years old today. My grandmother's school is about 40 years old. My grandfather's school is about 30 years old. I think I was born into the space, but professionally speaking, at that point, I didn't have like the proper training in education. And then I thought I needed to be trained in order to get into the sector and make an impact. What I knew I wanted to do, and I told my mom this around the time, was, Mommy, I want to help people. And how I decided to help people I guess it was just a course that I was going to chart based on the experiences I had available to me. So that's how I went into consulting. It so happened that in my consulting career, I worked with two state governments, and most of the work was in the social development and impact space. So I worked with uh, many ministries, departments, and agencies in the space that cater to women, children, and young people. And then after my career in consulting, I found myself at my mom's school. I worked there for 7 years. And through working in primary education in the private sector, I think I just got my eyes were opened to many opportunities, networking spaces in the public sector and the private sector whereby support was required. As a result of working in the school, I volunteered for the Ministry of Education in 2018 through a program which you and I were on called Ready Set Work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this was it was such an amazing experience because, first of all, it was good. It was very good to see many people who were looking to help. And we did this through a 13-week program whereby on Saturday mornings by 5 o'clock, we would all huddle up into a bus from the Ministry of Education, go to, I think it was 5 or 6 universities in Lagos State, and we would literally teach penultimate year students employability skills. And that
Mm-hmm.
again was another enlightening experience, just seeing how many people just who needed our help and also how many people who were able to help. So I think everything is kind of linked career wise. I think my life is just going in a certain direction. I'm enjoying the journey because it's been, I'm being led into the space where I'm going back and reflecting on what I told my mom about helping people. Because now, after having left the school in December, I'm at the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund, where essentially my job is to coordinate the programs that would help people to become employable through access to finance, access to business support, access to employability skills, and so on. Like all these tools that are needed to make people employable. One thing that I have observed since I moved back to Nigeria in 20, when did I move back? I think, when did we meet, Odunaka? I think I moved back in 2011 or 12.
2011, 12.
Yes, 2011, 12. So I mean, it was very easy for me to identify certain gaps in our education system through interactions with people. Soft skills were a big thing for me because even I noticed my lack of soft skills when I was at university in England. And that's why I joined a club like Toastmasters, which we're both members of. I knew that there were certain things I needed to know how to do properly: communication, leadership, team building. Those are essential soft skills that are needed to be successful in a career. So
Mm-hmm.
it was very clear to me when I moved back, just in my interactions with people, maybe if I go to a store, try to buy something, and just try to understand like the customer services experience and just the way people carry themselves and organize themselves around their jobs. It was clear that there were certain gaps. And I wondered then, is our education system able to close the gaps, close the gaps that the workforce requires? Is our education system also able to close the gaps in skills required to meet the demands of the economy? So those are questions I started to ponder over way back over this is over 10 years ago. And me being where I am is kind of helping me answer those questions or helping me see where how I can play in terms of designing initiatives that would close those gaps. Because we do have labor in Nigeria. We have many young people in the country. Majority of our population is below the age of 34, 35. Yet we have a dearth of, let me not call it a dearth, let me just call it there's a gap and it needs to be filled. So in terms of policy, I would say that there needs to be a proper review of the relevant and emerging sectors based on where the world is, where Nigeria is in that regard, and then where we need to be in terms of filling those gaps in the future. So those gaps both in the present and in the future, because like you said, Nigeria is behind. The world is not waiting for us. Whereas there's so many of us, like the population of Nigeria is larger than the population of some continents. So by virtue of that number of people alone, it just goes to show that we could either be it we could either make a great impact positively or negatively. So we just need
Right.
to everyone needs to come together to ensure that we're doing the right things to close those gaps I spoke about.
Okay, so it's interesting because I wanted to kind of pivot from your experience to sort of talk about like how we need to set up a good education system. I also come from an education family. My mom is a public school teacher, so I obviously think through like the broad population and how we, because I often think that our problems in Nigeria are systematic. And when you think of designing like solutions to systematic problems, you have to think from a systemic point of view. And so I liked what you said about like we need to decide what our goal is. Because I've heard like educators have this debate about, for example, vocational skills versus non-vocational skills. Should we put all our young people like in science and engineering programs and then build an economy based on like if an economy wants to move from for example from production to consumption, then you build around that versus like studying things that are self-fulfilling or like self-actualizing. So I'd like to get your view on that in terms of how we need to design the system, like understanding where we are as a country, what we're trying to achieve as a collective goal, the different weaknesses in our systems that allow, because even though we've worked on employability, I do think that basic education you get quite young, and that's most important. So, like, how do we design around all these things? And I know I've said a lot, but yes.
Yeah. You have said a lot, and I think these are questions that are continuously being asked, and I would say continuously evolving. I think these discussions need to be had on various platforms because Nigeria is beautiful in in the sense that, like I said, there are many of us, and there are many ways to play in. So the focus needs to be clear, and the options need to be available to everyone. So one thing I always say is that if you look at statistics, we don't have enough spaces in our universities for the number of university age people in Nigeria. Well, I'll speak for Lagos State and not for the whole of the country, just because that's the data I have closer access to. So what do we do if there are not enough? So the first thing is that we don't have enough room for everyone to go to university. So there are two groups of people. So there are those who actually go to uni, and then there are those who will probably not make it into uni. So for those who go into universities, what courses of study are available for them there? And are those courses relevant to what the market demands are? Because what I experienced as an employer was that whenever I interviewed certain people for certain roles, I would struggle to find the right talent for some very basic roles. So I used to wonder, okay, so what are people being taught when they go to uni? If you do indeed say that you're a graduate, why are you not able to perform certain what I would consider to be basic responsibilities at the workplace? So in that space, I think there needs to be a review on curriculum and skill sets required to be employable. So that's the for the part of formal education. For vocational training aspects of things, for maybe those who aren't able to get through the formal education system, I would also wonder. I think the thing about Nigeria is that I think there's something for everyone, right? So in that space as well, are the skill sets being addressed adequately? Are there good enough training centers that meet the requirements such that anyone who goes through those training processes becomes well skilled and employable, even if they go through the entrepreneurship route? Then there's also a mindset shift that I think needs to happen in terms of for every Nigerian, you must go through formal education. You must be a lawyer, doctor, engineer. What other? I think there's some classic career paths that people
Doctor, engineer, lawyer, accountant,
want,
whatever.
accountant. But the thing is that that's really not. That's not the path for everyone, and everyone is skilled in different ways. having worked in a school before 7 years, it really revealed to me that people learn in different ways. People have different skills. People are gifted and talented in different ways. So there must be room for everyone in various spaces. And one thing I'm glad to see now is that because of globalization, because of media and access to global networks, people are able to diversify their skill sets. And that's a movement that I think is quite positive. But one thing that we need to realize is that um, we need to understand the environment and systems that we're in we so that we know how to apply ourselves better. I don't know if that
Hmm.
answers your question. Yeah.
Yes, it does. Um, s- I don't know why I'm using my train of thought. Okay, so yeah, that answers my question. So I'm thinking about some of the things you said around design and solving for our problems. I think my follow-up question will be, what do you feel are the current barriers to doing that correctly? What are the things that we should be aware of or that we should be demanding from our leaders to do so that we can, get to that next level?
Mm. Yeah, that's a very good question. I think just more more focus on
Mhm.
education, more focus. I mean, just looking at the budgets historically the budget for education uh has not been where it should ideally be because well, I guess priorities are in other areas. There should also be more action than just talking, because people are always talking on various platforms about what we need to do, but the actions are not necessarily there. And then looking at the foundational challenges that the system has in itself. And some of these foundational challenges are as basic as infrastructure. If you go to
Mm,
some schools, you wouldn't see the basic infrastructure required to teach a child. So I think focus is really the word that I would I would stand on. Focus such that we're not distracted by any of or the other environmental nuances, and education is at the forefront. If you look at countries like I went to China in 2019, and it was clear to me from my interactions there. It was an educational trip anyway, but from the basic interactions I had with the people in the country, even though there was a language barrier, it was very clear that education was seen as it was important in every single system. Teachers were revered as very prestigious careers. Even the compensation packages for teachers was attractive. It was it is like a renowned career to be
mhm,
in that country. Whereas in Nigeria, there's certain perceptions of the education system, in addition to the insufficient focus from the government and the policy point of view. So I mean, we're kind of suffering for these trends and perhaps decisions or lack thereof from many years ago. Because what is being churned
mhm,
out now in terms of people who are of employable age is people who are not able to work in pretty much in many environments whereby there's certain specialized skill sets required.
Okay, that's very helpful. I'd like you then to talk about like your experience now working with the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund and how and what you're seeing, like what your experience has been there, particularly from an education perspective. What are the gaps that you've noticed, like coming from this kind of problem we have in our education system?
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Working at LSTF has been it has been quite an experience. I'm very happy to have to have been, I guess, to have been found, to have entered that system because it kind of reveals the true picture of what Lagos State looks like from the people point of view, or majority of the people, many people need help. That's one thing I've come to realize. There are many people who really, really need help. And if we do a survey of the majority of people in Lagos today, they'll tell you that they need money. They need money to start their businesses. They need money to grow their businesses. That is fact. At the very basic of levels, people need that access to finance. And from the education point of view, just having after having reviewed the profile of the people that we target as beneficiaries for the fund, people also need to be educated in certain ways so that they can run sustainable businesses. Small, medium enterprises well, I guess in any country could be a huge driver of the economy. And just taking a look at Nigeria, and how many people there are, and the rate of unemployment, it's very easy to see that entrepreneurship is a route that people could take. But do people even have the basic tools to thrive in their own businesses? So from the education point of view, what I've realized that is important is even if we're giving people access to finance, there needs to be access to business support. Are they learning financial management, bookkeeping, human resources management, legal, just sessions on what they need to do legally to formalize their businesses? There are many informal businesses in the state. There are many informal businesses because some people just don't know how to formalize their businesses and they don't have access to the education systems that would provide the resources for them to formalize things. So there's a huge gap um, in terms of in terms of that measure of success in running a business.
In this part of the episode, I was asking my guest about how they think about their training in engineering and their previous experience working in education and consulting and how it all comes together in her current role.
What I can say, and I think my boss actually asked me along those lines as well, in terms of, okay, so how do you think through the work? Because I'm not going to lie, when I first started working at the fund, I just kind of wondered what my fit was or how I would fit. I mean, apart from the passion and the interest in making an impact, in terms of my own core skills, what was the fit? And I
Mm-hmm.
would say that being an engineer, it's really being a chemical and process engineer really, really helps me think through things a little differently in the sense that I would always look I think through I think in processes. So I always think of what the outcome or objective should be, and then I work backwards to the resources I have available and the terrain I can like what steps I need to take to get to that outcome, while also understanding that along the way things might need to change a little bit and I might need to pivot in one way or the other or look for additional resources or additional resources, you know, additional resources, but still bearing in mind that same objective. So I think that'd be an answer to that question, like in terms of design
Yeah,
and
I think actually that's fascinating because like you said processes. I often also think about systems, and I think
yeah,
those are closely connected. And
yeah,
just like having that goal in mind and then working towards that. And I think it has come out really clearly in this conversation. I suppose the last thing I'd like to ask you is like, have we talked about your initiatives? Like, what are the current initiatives? What can, because it seems like we often design nice policies and somewhere around implementation, maybe the wheel falls apart. So I'd like you to talk
yeah.
about like what we as Nigerians, as ourselves, holding these people accountable, what we can do to get the systems that we want implemented, how we need to be, because you work for us like as a government worker, like how should we be thinking about like as someone who works for government, how do you think about, making sure that these designs are not just the design phase,
Yeah.
they are properly implemented and, we all reap the benefits?
Yeah. Okay. So one thing I'll say is that we've spoken about systems a lot here, but I need to really emphasize the fact that a system is it's various groups of people or stakeholders working towards one common goal. And these
Mm,
stakeholders include diverse types of people. So, of course, anyone can design something that is very nice and ideal and theoretical. But the bottom line is that
mhm.
it's going to be interacting with different groups of stakeholders and it is dependent on other systems. Now, we just need to start speaking with one same voice. And that is really where the challenge may lie because everyone has their own interests, everyone has their own accountability, their own ways of being accountable. I think everything in that system needs to align. Now, that journey to get there is what I think the challenge is because sometimes it's not clear where I guess I guess sometimes it's not really clear what the benefit is for different groups of people. For
Mhm.
example, if you were to tell like private educators to take some interest in public policy development, you might not get much of a buy-in from them because what really has the government done for them? Because private educators are established as a result of what is some passion for impact and as well as well, the government hasn't sufficiently met these needs. Those nuances need to be taken into consideration when developing systems like that. People need to know their what their benefits would be from a system that is formulated. Otherwise, if they don't know, if they're not able to participate, then the system could fall apart or it could even become dysfunctional. There needs to be a lot of synergy in that system. The dialogue needs to be flow from one stakeholder group to another stakeholder group. I think we also need to have a little more trust in the systems that are developed. There also needs to be a feedback process through which any change that needs to be made in that system can be implemented. It could be ideal, but it's also quite complicated. But the message needs to be consistent across all parts of that system. It needs to be consistent, but also tailored to the different stakeholders that have
Mhm.
a system, such that they know where they're going, and it is in the same direction that everyone is being steered towards.
No, thank you. I think for me it's been great speaking with you, and for me the key takeaway is this idea of, in design we must first like decide what our goal is, what the
Yeah,
objective is, and where we're heading to. And collectively as a society, I think we've all failed to kind of define what this is. And we're still in the process of defining that. Hopefully, we're not running out of time, but I think it's an ongoing, and even people that have developed what their goal is, I think there's often a process of refinement. So maybe that's why we're having all these conversations around different policy issues, because we need to get people aware of what's going on
yeah.
and help find these goals and purposes. But thank you so much for talking to us. Before you leave, I'd like to ask you to talk about something you're reading now, or like recommend a book from
Okay.
like on the subject or from anything.
Okay. Interesting. I'm actually reading two books at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And forgive me, I've forgotten the authors. Can you imagine? One was actually recommended by one of the McKinsey newsletters I read. It's called The
Mm-hmm.
Coming Wave. So it's basically
Mm-hmm.
talking about artificial intelligence and it being the coming wave and how we all
Mm-hmm.
need to catch on to the wave. You know, like when you're surfing and you catch the
Right.
wave. Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm reading that. It's very interesting. It's different from what I would normally read, but I'm trying to read things that are outside of my comfort zone, so to speak. Then there's another book I'm reading, which my mom gave to me. It's called Right from the Start, and I've forgotten the author as well. But it's a very I like the book because I guess my mom gave it to me because we're entrepreneurs in my family and we're trying
Mhm.
to build businesses that last. So the book speaks
Mhm.
about different businesses around the world that have lasted many years. The author categorizes businesses into visionary ones and non-visionary ones. The visionary ones being the ones that have attained success sustainably over many decades, and the non-visionary ones are those who may not have done so. And the chapter I'm reading now is very interesting because it's called Time Telling or Clock Making. And
Hmm.
for me, it's like, this is the way everyone should be thinking. How are we clock making? And it actually speaks to our discussion on systems because you need to understand how to build that clock as opposed to just telling the time. If you spend more time building the clock, then you have a stronger system that is sustainable and would last
Right.
many, many years to come. So
Yeah.
yeah, thanks for asking me that. Yeah.
Thank you. That's like a book that I'd love to check out if I can find time.
Yeah.
That sounds
I'll wait to
really
know the
interesting.
offer after this call.